parenting. Sorry about all of the room shuffle excitement. That's part of the joy. So it won't feel too formal, right? The program where talks about the data from the Family Acceptance Project shows that having accepting parents leads to better physical and mental health outcomes for LGBTQ youth and young adults. But what does being an accepting parent look like in actual practice? And so our goal here is to discuss behaviors in family that strengthen family bonds and benefit our kids. The presenters are me, I'm Neca, Allgood, and Jen, Blair, and John, Arnell, and we're each going to briefly tell our stories and introduce ourselves. And then we were planning on showing the film Families Are Forever from the Family Acceptance Project, but the 80 steps in the other room, so we're skipping that.
Well, the sound wasn't working, so you could watch the movie, but
it's not much without sound. Yeah.
You could have acted it out.
Yeah.
subtitles.
Okay. So after we introduce ourselves, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the data from the Family Acceptance Project. And then we'd like to have kind of an open discussion about what affirming parenting, what supportive parenting looks like in practice, behaviorally, how we can do that in our families. So let me start. Ben and John, you guys want to arm wrestle, decide to introduce yourselves first? There it is. Jen, I vote for you too.
I have really strong arms. I could have won. So my story is super quick and easy. I did every super Mormon thing. I fit into the box perfectly. All the people who talk about their struggles, you don't really fit in, and I didn't have any of that. I have a fantastic family and a great board. The girls did river rafting. We didn't do the weird quilty cooking things. We had great budgets and all of the things that Mormons complain about for girls. We didn't have any of that. I didn't try on wedding dresses when I was 8. And I went to BYU and I got a degree and I got married at the temple and I had these fantastic kids and we moved all over the place, 5 different states, and every time we moved, the Lord swooped in and I had this instant family that helped me with my kids. My husband was going to medical school, so I was just doing kind of a single mom thing a lot. And so it was great because I had this instant family that, instant friends that helped me raise my kids. And it really was working for us. And we moved back to Idaho, and the schools there are not awesome. And my kids didn't really fit into the school system there. They didn't know what to do with us. In fact, the teachers were coming to me saying, we don't have anything to offer your children. So we started the weird venture of homeschooling, which was great. Because we got to be really close as a family as we figured out how to homeschool. And my oldest at the time was 12. And it ended up being a huge blessing because we got to skip a lot of potential bullying. We knew he was a little bit different because he didn't like sports, and we didn't know what boys did if they didn't do sports. But he was really smart, and so we chalked a lot of it up to that, right? He was just too smart for sports. And he was really musical, so we just kind of let it lead with that. He was just too smart to hang out with the other boys because they hadn't caught up yet. That's why he liked to hang out with girls. And he doesn't know how to dress at all. He still just assume wrap his shoes up with duct tape. And he doesn't care about decoration. He didn't fit all the stereotypes, and I was too dumb to think of that ideally might be gay because Mormons can't be gay. And we were going on through our happy little lives until he was about 16. And we had a few years. He's my oldest. We have 3 daughters that follow him. And he'd been going through a few years of a lot of foot stomping and a lot of pound pieces. And I chalked it up every time to teenage angst. I would think, that's what they're talking about. Start of teen years where they're kind of moody. And we were just going to fight through it. And he and I had a good relationship, and he was a really good kid. And so I just kept thinking, we got to hang in there until he makes it to 18 and they get happy again. And he would say things a lot like, I wish I wasn't alive. Why do I even have to be alive? about those moody teenagers. When he finally came out at age 16, I realized that I didn't know anything at all. First of all, about my own faith, because I thought it had the answers to everything. Because for me, it actually had. It made logical, perfect sense, and it had answered any questions that I ever needed answered. Because for me, it worked. And as I looked at him, he was perfect. And he was perfect as he was. And because I knew nothing about homosexuality, I went to the church first for answers. And the first resource I found was The Miracle of Forgiveness, which I had never read before. And although I knew nothing, I was smart enough to realize I was wrong. And I knew that he hadn't chosen this. I knew that nothing about him would choose this. So everything I knew about my faith seemed suddenly wrong. And that was probably a blessing for us, because I knew that I didn't know anything. And so I had to look to my son for answers. And I had to go to him and say, I don't know anything. We're going to have to figure this out together. But I'm going to be on your side. We're going to work this out together and figure out how to do it together. Which was probably a blessing. If I thought I had known something, we might have been in trouble. I might have tried to teach him something, and I would have probably done it wrong. But I didn't. I didn't know anything at all. So we worked together, and he was super, super patient with me, because I asked a lot of really dumb questions, and he would tell me nice things, like, Mom, it took me 4 years to really figure out what I was doing. I don't expect you to have all the answers in a couple months. And we pretty much have figured it out together. And our families ended up leaving the church, all of us, and we kind of left at different paces. I left first, actually, and then he left second, and about a year after that, the rest of the family followed. But because we left at our own paces, we don't have a lot of animosity, although sometimes we get very mad. But for the most part, I have a lot of respect for my friends who are members, and that's our journey, where we're at, and how we got there.
Okay, I'm John Arnell. I'm here from Redwood City, California, so the Bay Area. And so the reason I'm kind of helping with this is because I wanted to go to, mostly I wanted to be able to answer questions about what's the experience of being like a gay son with parents and how my parents have been, what has worked, what hasn't worked. So my coming out to my parents and the rest of my family was a little bit bumpy at first, but we're in a really good place now. There's been a lot of mistakes that we've made on both sides. I first essentially came out to my dad, but not very specific terms, 5 years ago. Maybe 6 years ago now. I didn't tell him that I was gay. I told him that for about 10 years I had been habitually at gay porn. So a couple years later, I came out to my mom, who then kind of initiated talking to my dad again, because we hadn't really talked about it since then. And one of the first things my dad said to me was, "You didn't tell me you were gay. You just told me you were looking at gay porn." and to me, it was like, what? To my dad, it was like, you didn't give me this information. You didn't explain it to me the way that I needed to hear it to know what you were talking about. So I learned along the way that it's very important that I interact and communicate with different people the way that they need to hear it, the way they need to understand it. So when I first told my dad about the porn thing, his reaction was, well, like therapy, you know? And so I never wanted to talk to him again about the subject if he didn't bring it up again, thinking the best thing, what I wanted was for him not to talk about it. When I came out to my mom a couple years later, which my dad had never talked to my mom, she never said anything, which is crazy to me, but that was super important to me, to find out that my dad, when I hadn't given him permission to tell my mom, he hadn't told her anything. So that was a big boost of trust. between me and my dad. Anyway, I got my mom over the phone one morning on my way to work, and she started crying. She said, I said, "Are you crying?" She said, "Yes, but I'm not crying for what you might think. I'm crying because I'm thinking about how hard it must have been for you all these years, not being able to tell me this." The timing with our kind of developing relationship, I feel like has been really ideal, even though it's been later than for a lot of people. Like Jen was saying, my son came out to her at 16. I didn't start coming out to my parents until I was 24. But the timing has been really ideal. I waited longer for my mom because my mom, I knew, had untreated mental health problems. And I was waiting for her to be in a place that I felt like she was going to be able to handle it. So she got therapy, she got on antidepressants, and then I felt like she was ready. And it turned out to be true. She's been able to handle it really well. And our relationship is great. It's not like, I think, a lot of what a lot of people think of as what they would expect their parents to be if they wanted them to be affirming. A lot of the parents that you see like participating in Affirmation, Mormons building bridges, they're very active, they're very vocal. They want very much for their children to know, I am part of this effort with you. My parents are not like that. They don't read a lot, they don't talk a lot about anything related to homosexuality. They are not part of any kind of activist groups. But they do it, they affirm their way. And I have learned to recognize the power and the value in that. And in my being able to let them be them while they let me be me. So that's kind of how our relationship is now. And maybe we'll talk about some more details later.
So I have to start by saying that my husband David is in the room. And so when he chimes in to correct me, he has every right to do that because he was there too.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah. We are the parents of 3 children. Our oldest and youngest are both on the autism spectrum. They are very bright, pretty weird boys. But we were expecting pretty weird kids, so we're good with that. Our middle child, Grayson, is female to male transgender. Grayson was a gender variant little kid, but did not express any dysphoria prior to puberty. And so it didn't even occur to me that I had a transgender child. I was just like, oh, I have a child who would rather play with Lego than dolls. I would rather play with Lego than dolls. I'm right on board with that. I have a child who's obsessed with dinosaurs. I'm right on board with that. I have a 5-year-old who, while all of their little girl peers wanted to dress as princesses or ballerinas for Halloween, wanted to be Darth Maul here at Star Wars 1 came out. I made an awesome Darth Maul costume and was I used to say that, oh, you know, my daughter and 1,000 little boys were Darth Maul for Halloween that year. And now I know that it was 1,001 little boys. When Grayson went through female puberty, the dysphoria started really strongly. Looking back, I had a very depressed little 5th and 6th grader. However, my oldest had not been happy about the onset of puberty. In his case, it was just that it was a sign of growing up much faster than he felt safe and comfortable growing up. And so there was a real set of clues there that I missed for Grayson because I was interpreting my second child through the lens of my first, which is, I guess, a common challenge of parenting, right? You're always fighting the last battle. he started having some pretty significant health problems, where he had what he called crashes, where my happy, outgoing, verbal child just was shutting down and couldn't talk and couldn't express what was going on, and these crashes over the course of his sophomore and junior year of high school were becoming more and more frequent, and I was really, really concerned. So I took him to a doctor. Was he having blood sugar issues? And then our general practitioner did a few tests, and no, it wasn't that, and then our general practitioner was stumped and said, well, you need to go see a neurologist. So took Grayson to a neurologist, and the neurologist was talking about, maybe a brain tumor, or maybe seizures, and we're doing all the medical tests to figure that out, and that was very worrisome. While all that testing was going on, I was thinking about all of these very gender variant behaviors I was seeing in my kid. And it's not that Grayson was, the typical boy sports thing. But after he got his hair cut pretty short and had a preference for pretty gender neutral clothing, I was seeing things like he would get misgendered by someone who didn't know him. Misgendered, who didn't think he was a boy. He's a boy. If Grayson wasn't offended, he was thrilled. And there was just a ton of little things like that. It was just making me go, and then
the thing that made it hard to notice is that you don't have a real gendered household, and so there wasn't either parent enforcing gender norms, because neither Neca or I are very far over on their assigned side. We're both kind of right there.
Yeah, and so maybe there were some clues there, I guess, too. But when Grayson was 16, he told me he was attracted to girls, which I had already figured out. But you read, you're not supposed to out your kid, even to themselves. And so I just shut up about it. I figured he'd tell me when he was ready.
Or to gay boys.
Yeah, that's true. He's pretty attracted to gay boys too. So. And I said, "Oh, that's okay. I love you." And then I went downstairs to do some research, and at the there's a Mormon and gay website now. But 6 years ago, there was nothing from the church.
Except the miracle of forgiveness.
Except the miracle of forgiveness, which I, to my credit, so what I did find when I went searching online was Affirmation's website, and up on the top at the time there was a bar that was gay, lesbian, and transgender, and in one of the times in my life when I really felt guided by the Spirit, I clicked on transgender and read what was there, and that's when all the pieces came together for me, and I was like, I see this. And so the next day when Grayson and I had some time to talk, I explained what transgender was to him, which he'd never heard of. And I said, "Here, you're a girl. Who are you?" And I expected him to say, "I have a boy's brain." But he didn't. He said, "I have a boy's soul." And when he said that, I heard the truth of that statement. And so we plunged pretty quickly into helping him socially transition so that he could live as the boy he is. During the time when he was getting ready to socially transition, which we did very fast, in like 6 weeks, the crashes almost entirely went away. And as it turns out, those crashes were like panic attacks. They were spikes in his anxiety related to his distress. James Jenner was told that he was trying to fake being a girl when he was dying. And so I tell people, when your doctor's talking about seizures and brain tumors, finding out your child is just transgender is incredibly amusing. Helping Grayson transition has been a tremendous blessing, like I said. I don't want to give the fake idea that, oh yay, I got behind my kid and helped him transition and then everything has gone fine in his life and he's never had problems since, because that would be very false. There have certainly been some challenges in his life since, and continue to be. That's the way life works. He has chosen to stay active in the church. And it's funny, in that 6-week window when we were going from socially transition, me and David and my dad all independently took Grayson aside and said, there's more affirming churches out there. We would be glad, we would be okay if you needed to go someplace else. And so he knows that there are other options out there. He is choosing to stay Mormon, and that is his choice. And I'm proud of his choice, and I recognize that that that's not always an easy path to be transgender in the church. Kind of next part of our presentation is talking a little bit about the Family Acceptance Project. And I've got a bunch of Family Acceptance Project brochures here, maybe not enough for everybody to look at, and some of them are the LDS version. And some of them are the non-LDS version. But all of them will have the same kind of some stuff in the middle. Just a little bit about how the Family Acceptance Project got their data. Caitlin Ryan, who's the lead scientist, the lead researcher on the Family Acceptance Project, she first contacted a pool of LGBT young adults and surveyed them on a bunch of physical and mental health factors that LGBT people are already known to be at higher risk for, right? Like suicidality and drug abuse and at higher risk for sexually transmitted diseases, things like that. And then from those young adults, she got contact information for one or more family members, usually parents. And they then interviewed those parents and did fairly extensive open-ended interviews, having those parents talk about their relationship with their LGBT kid, particularly during their teen years. And then after they had all of those interviews, they looked at the parent responses, and they did what's called coding those behaviors. So you can look and this parent will say, oh, I was upset that my gay son wore way too family clothes, and I tried to get them to change what they wore. And they might have another parent who said, oh yeah, my gay son, he was always wearing these really flamboyant clothes, and then try to get them to dress more normal. And they would say, those are the same behaviors, right? So they were able to kind of code those interviews down into a basic set of behaviors that parents did, and then looked at those behaviors and classified them as supportive behaviors and affirming behaviors, or kind of neutral behaviors, or rejecting behaviors, right? And what they then looked at is the parents' behaviors and their children's outcomes. And when you look at their data in the Family Acceptance Project booklets, they tend to, present it on pages like this where they're, trying to show outcomes. And so they're showing, like, this is the classic one, lifetime suicide attempts for highly rejected LGBT young people. And what their data shows is that LGBT young people who experience high levels of rejection in terms of their parents' behaviors had an 8 times greater risk for suicide attempts than LGBT young people who experienced very low levels of rejected behaviors, right? So that's kind of the way to parse the Family Acceptance Project's data. And the take-home answer shouldn't be a surprise that LGBT young people with parents who show more accepting behaviors are at much lower risk for a number of negative outcomes that as parents we don't want for our kids, And so I think it's important to understand that being an affirming parent is not a magic wand. This does not mean you can utterly and completely protect your child from every negative outcome out there, right? Because you can't. The world's a real scary place. And there are influences on your child's life other than you. But being an affirming parent helps. It helps a lot. It helps measurably.
One thing that I think is super important about this research is it doesn't say ever anything about the parent's belief system. It talks only about rejecting and affirming behaviors. So it doesn't say anything about parents who believe that lesbian couples go to hell have this, or believe that eternal couples can be in same-gender marriages, or believe that transitioning this or transitioning that. These behaviors are very specific, and they have nothing to do with belief system. You can be a total temple recommend holding, devout, believing Mormon and still do all of the affirming behaviors that lead to the best outcome for your child without changing your belief system at all. And I think that's really important. I know that most of the people in this room, by virtue of being in this room, are probably well aware of that. But we also interact with people who maybe would be scared to come into a room like that. And that's an important thing I think that we need to share, is that when you, like every once in a while I'll hear something like, my son has a boyfriend and I am very nice to him. I even hugged him. And there's this weird vibe that if you're polite to them, they might think that you have given up your belief system or whatever. And it's just not true. You can have your beliefs, and if you read the list, really you can be like, well, I can do that, well, I can do that, well, I can do that. And I think that's something that we need to be very, very overt and almost patronizing and be like, hey, guess what? It's okay to do this and still believe anything you believe. Anything you believe is okay, but you need to be doing these things anyway. If you want the best chance of keeping your kid off the streets, if you want the best chance of keeping your kid away from self-harming behaviors, and you can believe anything you want, and you don't have to even be a faker. You can openly and loudly believe anything you want and still do these behaviors. Because I think there's a disconnect where people are afraid that they can't do those two things simultaneously.
Yeah.
I have a question, actually. So I've invited my mother to come to this conference several times, and she's always expressed hesitation because during her temple recommend interview, she's asked if she's involved or affiliated with organizations that whose values do not align with the church. And she says that she's afraid that if she comes to this conference, she cannot be honest with her state president and say that she hasn't been. So do you have any advice for me to talk to my mom about how to come here and still?
Elder Christopherson, who has a gay brother, has specifically said that Affirmation is not an organization that would meet that standard, right?
We have a direct
that-
quote.
Was that written or spoken?
Yeah,
Spoken aloud,
Yeah, it was
on TV.
published.
yes, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
that-
have to say.
Yep.
And I also, in my temple recommended we were just having in June, I was just like, okay, and I just said, this is what my life is like, this is who I support.
Well, some bishops and
And
stake
They
presidents,
were fine.
because I did get sent to my stake president. Like, to be fair, I did get sent to my stake president, because my bishop was confused and he was afraid to go to the Affirmation website to see. And I was like, right, we
It's
know,
contagious.
right, we know that different church leaders have different understanding levels. And so I did get sent to my stake president, and I just went with the quote and said, look, right here, he was on the news saying it, and here's the quote, whatever. My stake president was like, go back home. And, I mean, I don't go to church anymore anyway, but your mom's concern is valid, because we know this happens to people, but we have on the Affirmation board, on the board of Affirmation, many temple recommendations, including Neca.
John?
Can I make one comment about this point? This is a perfect example of the tension that parents experience. Lots of parents in that situation wanting to be like a faithful member of the church, wanting to be affirming. They feel like a really powerful tension there, and they're afraid of crossing too far in one direction or the other. And so, like, as a child, I would say, like, in my experience, it's been very important to let my parents experience their tension and let them work that out in their own time.
I'm going to say, in my family, I experienced tension. My parents have that conflict that maybe I felt for many years, just way after I felt it. I respect that they have to go through that. I think relative to this, though, I have lots of friends that are on this spectrum, right, from not at all to very accepting. Certainly the greatest benefit is when the parents at least align with the support they're providing. So I felt at times that my parents are trying to be supportive and they're going through this process and I respect it, but I still don't, I think, have the benefit of that very accepting where their beliefs align with the support they're trying to provide.
Although I do have to say, when Dr. Bryan presents her research, one of the things she talks about is parents who are moderately rejecting as opposed to extremely rejecting. And she makes the point that even by moving the needle a little from being extremely rejecting to moderately rejecting, it has a big impact on outcomes for your child. You know, parents don't have to be perfect parents. Every step they do to being better parents helps their kid.
I was going to, excuse me, I was going to say that in our last session, John Randall mentioned that the reason Elder Christopherson said that, and one of the reasons that Affirmation is not one of those organizations you have to worry about, is that Affirmation takes no position on doctrine. So
Right.
we
Individual members of
specifically,
Affirmation can believe whatever they want, yeah.
yeah, we support, as he said, individuals, and we're not taking a position with respect to the church.
So,
Just to like, for those of you who are here and are in that position too, and just in case you're not aware, or your parents aren't aware, there is a group called I'll Walk With You that's online. It's not associated with Affirmation at all. It's a totally separate group called I'll Walk With You. To join the group, parents have to have an LGBTQ IAP kid, and they have to be an active believing member of the church. It's a highly moderated Facebook group.
There's no church bashing in that.
No church bashing, no church leader bashing allowed. It's highly moderated. And it's a secret group, so you can't search for it. Neca could help somebody join the group. I can help somebody join the group. I don't participate for obvious reasons, but I can help them join the group. And it's for parents to talk about things that are painful. And they learn affirming type behaviors where they're like, what about this? What about this? And it really is about kind of helping navigate those boundaries where, you know, your child's an adult and now your focus is on relationship. And your parenting is different than when you have 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or whatever. And sometimes, I don't know, if you don't have kids yet, I don't know, this might be a different class, but like when you grow up Mormon, like a Mormon mom, starting about the age, I would say 8 or 9, you start being taught very, very intensely that your reason to exist is to have children and to get them back to the celestial kingdom. And that is pretty much the only reason you exist. And so when you are 30 or 35 or whatever, and you realize that maybe one of yours isn't coming with you to that table, right? They have those chairs, and there's maybe an empty one. You have failed the reason for your entire existence. You are like an eternal failure. Your job's not done. So even you have this, 40-year-old child who's a rocket scientist who cured cancer and saved, world peace, and there's no more starvation. You still have an empty chair at the table, and so your job as a mom isn't done. You still have to save that child, and this is something that you had drilled into you from seriously the age of 8, and there's a lot of privilege that comes in being able to change your own paradigm and honor their adulthood, and that's really hard. And you don't have any support for yourself to learn how to fix your brain to do that, because your entire culture and your own family, your own siblings and your own parents are constantly telling you as a mother, get that kid back, and you're listening to conference and they're telling you, if you're faithful enough, if you fast enough, if you pray enough, that kid will come back. That's your job, even though your kid's 40, right? It's your job, your responsibility, and moms feel this intense pressure to get that kid back to the celestial kingdom. And I don't know if people get that, pressure that parents have if you don't have a child. I remember being a kid being like, this is my life, this is not your life, this is my life. But there's this, thing that you have, growing up, that you don't have a way to change. It's hard work to turn that off in your head and really give your child agency back to them and let them own that.
That's kind of one of my questions. Because it feels like, and this is probably the most exposure I've ever had to discussions primarily about parenting. But it's instinctive, like you're just saying, when you find out your child is not going to fit the norm, it becomes all about what do I do to help the child and don't have affect positive outcomes for the child. But is there a lot of support for parental self-care and how you should think about it? It seems like it all becomes about the child. And then the only other kind of aspect of that I'm aware of is a controversy maybe it was last year sometime where there's the Mama Dragons, and there was something where some of them started talking about something where it was kind of about them and how they were dealing with it, and then there was this backlash you shouldn't be talking about that, you should be focused on the kids, why are you trying to steal the limelight away? And I'm like, it's hard for everyone. So do you feel like there's a lot of discussion about how do you, because I would argue if the parents really kind of had a way to work through that, exactly what you're describing, hey, it's not my fault, it's confusing, I don't know what to do, and that's okay, I'm still a good parent. That kind of self-care would make it easier to be supportive to your child.
Right. So full disclosure, Jen and I are both on the board of the Mom Dragons.
Oh, okay.
Neca's the president.
And I just sort of saw it passing on Facebook on someone's comment.
So the Mom Dragons is primarily a support group and a Facebook group and forums. And our goal is to give a safe space for moms to have those conversations, to deal with some of the not in front of their kid. That's not usually what kids need from their parents. And so, but parents need to talk about that.
Yeah, just to make a general comment about that. the moment that you enter into the sphere of trying to be an ally or be an affirming parent, you're going to let people down. Your kid's going to think sometimes you're being rejecting of me because you didn't say something that I wanted you to say in the right moment, or because you said it in the wrong way. It was like an affirming statement, but you like expressed some reservations, and that made you feel rejected. And I think that's just inevitable when it comes down to it. Being the parent of a gay child, or a transgender child, or any child really, is first and foremost a human relationship with individuals who are human and who have needs and who have desires and who have concerns and stresses. And like in my mind, the goal shouldn't be to make sure that I never let my child down. And as a child, I can never let my parents down. It's that like we stick together and we figure out how to be more affirming as we go along. And we ask each other, what do you need from me? What can I do better? To me, it's like it's the matter of like progressing rather than being imperfect right now.
And doing it together, you know, it's not,
Yeah,
it's
together.
not like, it's not just about the child, it's about the family, it's about the parent and the child relationship, and you're figuring that together.
Right. And one of the things that we have found in Monodragons is because we have people joining us all the time, that they may be joining us at very different places on their journey of how to learn how to be an affirming parent. And so, yeah, they're going to put their foot in the house. So. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing I think is interesting too is this idea of sort of policing, you know, like, don't ever say this, you said the wrong thing. That happens that I see kind of, again, in some of the people I follow on Facebook happening in their comments among people that are basically strangers but all following a prominent person. It's really interesting that, you know, instead of focusing in on what's really positive, it becomes about finding out what the right thing to say is and do with it. I don't know how you get everyone to kind of get over that, like we're on the same team here. But.
Yeah.
You have to accept as an ally that you're going to get bashed. So,
Yeah.
you know, we have to have.
And then some of that bashing is coming from a legitimate place of being. You know, there are people in the LGBT community who have really been hurt by the church, by their families, by society, and so, you know, when they speak out and say, you know, this is hurtful to me, you're not being a good ally. I think the first job for a parent is to listen and say, well, yeah, what do I need to learn there from that hurt? You know?
That's what I was gonna say. When people are mad and they're lashing out saying you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it badly, I think we say, probably you're probably right. I'm probably doing it badly this time. Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of get back to what Jen was talking about that no empty chairs ideal and how harmful that is. And it's kind of related to a narrative that shows up a lot in stories and Nansen or whatever. A parent whose child has gone astray, and this faithful parent spends decades grieving for their child who has gone astray. And then maybe there's a happy ending where the child comes back or whatever. But and I think it's really important as parents to look at the flaws in that narrative. That is a horrendous burden to spend on your child, to put on your child, that you are the cause of all my parental grief. You know? And stop and look at all of the wonderful things in your child's life. You know? Okay, maybe my child has needed to step away from the church for their own mental health. You know? My child actively made a choice to defend their mental health. Is that what you want from the, you know, to the healthy grown-up you raised? Yeah, it is. You know, it's like, okay, you know, yeah, my child's not active in the church. My child's getting up and going to work every day. My child's doing their homework. My child is kind to their siblings. My child has the most amazing rainbow-colored hairstyle you've ever seen in your life, whatever. But to step out of that narrative of grief, to enjoy the child you actually have, instead of spending all this time grieving for the child that your child is not.
So I wanted to share a couple of quick anecdotes from my experience with my experience with my parents. My parents are seminary teachers. I think they both work in the temple. They're like as faithful in church as you can be. But there's been little things over time that have demonstrated to me that my parents have a healthy sense of like let my kids be my kids. So I think before I came out to my parents, we were sitting around on the beach on a family vacation, and at this point it was just me and my dad. And I don't know where the conversation was at the time, but I said, "So, Dad, how would you feel if one of your kids left the church?" And he said, here's the thing. He's like, it would be hard for me, but I think everything just works out. And then he tells the story. He's actually told me this story 2 or 3 times, thinking it's the first time ever. So he says, I was thinking the other day. His dad, my grandpa, is now, I think, just turned 90. He said, I was thinking about my dad. And, my dad is like a great guy, very faithful, but he's got a lot of issues still to work out. And he's 90. And he's going to be gone soon. And so my dad says to me, I used to think that we had to fix it all in this life and then, be ready to be in the celestial kingdom when we cross over. He's like, my dad is nowhere close. So what that tells me is that there's a long time to figure things out. It's a long way to go. Nothing is done when you die. So what he says to me at this point is, if somebody isn't in the church, then to me, that just means I need to give them the same credit I'm giving my dad, which is let things work out over time, over eternities. And as long as they're trying to be a good person, then I know that I can trust that their trajectory over the long term is going to be okay. So that was a really powerful thing. That was before I had come out and before I had stopped in the church. Another thing that was a very affirming thing that my dad said also before I came out. Actually, there were 2 conversations we had as a family that actually were very surprising to me, that my dad had no way of knowing were going to affect me the way they did. But one time when I was probably young teens, I remember we were sitting on a family scripture study, and there was some comment that was made about somebody who was gay. And my dad cut off the conversation, and he was like, gay people are normal people. He's like, I've worked with a lot of gay people. They're great. They're nice people, just like all of us. So don't ever talk about them like they're weird. And then several years later, when I was in high school, we were sitting around as a family, and my dad said there's this bit of business that we need to talk about. Some of you may have heard that one of our cousins has come out as lesbian. And we had the same talk again. And he said, we don't treat her like she's weird. She's a good person, just like all of us, and it doesn't change anything. So he was establishing this idea before he even knew that it was going to be, related to me. That for me was very encouraging, even though the relationship was still strained a little bit between us at first. I knew that when it came down to it, then this is how my dad felt. One last thing I wanted to say was the most affirming thing that my mom has ever said to me. And I was visiting my family, and we were going for a drive, and my mom says, have I told you about the dream that I had the other day? I said, no, you haven't told me about the dreams. So she says, I had a dream the other day. I was sitting in the sacrament meeting, and I looked back in the back door, and I saw a gay couple walking in the door. And I looked at them, and I thought, they're just a couple. they're just like any couple. And like, this is not something I could have ever imagined coming from my mom. So to me, that's like one of the most powerful statements that she's ever made to me. The point I want to make with all of these things is that like being an affirming parent happens over time and like little bits at a time. And like your kids will notice, like if you deep down inside have like good desires for them, even if you don't always say the right thing, which my parents haven't always said the right thing, when you say the right thing, it's going to stick and they're going to feel it. And so like the message for me is like, give it time and let those things happen and build as your life goes on.
Thank you, John. That was so good. So in the middle fold of the Family Acceptance Project booklet, I think in both versions, there's a section that's behaviors to avoid, and then on the other side of the page, behaviors that help. And I just wanted to kind of spend this last 15 minutes or so that we have talking about some of the behaviors that help listed. I mean, I figure you can read behaviors to avoid on your own, and if you read any of them and go, oh, well, that's, when we know better, we do better, right? But let's kind of spend a little time looking at some behaviors that help and how those behaviors can concretely happen in real life. Right? So the first one on the list is talk with your child or foster child about their LGBT identity. Sometimes even parents who want to be affirming parents, we always wait for our kid to bring it up. You know? And we've heard, oh, you're not supposed to have your kid. So I get that you're not supposed to have your kid. But once your kid has told you something, you know, they might be waiting for you to bring it up next time.
Be curious. That is huge to me. Be curious. Be like, oh, like, tell me more about that. Like, how does that feel? Like, oh, I don't understand this. Act like this is something that's really interesting about your child that you really want to understand.
I outed my kid.
Yeah.
I mean, not to anyone else, but to him. So past him.
Me too. Okay, there's mom. And in the modern world where
Wait, the question is, why is that so bad?
Why is that so bad? I never heard that one.
So the thinking is that, you know, even if your child is gay or lesbian or whatever, that they have their own coming out to themselves process that they get to do in their own time and way. And I think that is wise advice. I think that sometimes parental judgment needs to override that wise advice.
I've been told by many therapists also that if they're not ready to tell you, they lie to you, and then it makes it harder to come out later because they have to tell you and like repent of the lie.
Oh, if you ask them.
Right. So, in this age where our kids have access to the internet, one of the ways we can ask that tell me more question is to say, I would like to learn more. Are there good, can you recommend a good website to me? Can you recommend a good resource to me? Is a chance for parents to say, to open the conversation again and open it from a way of, I would like to learn more. The next behavior that help they list is express affection when your child tells you or when you learn that your child is gay or transgender. I mean, that seems straightforward. Your kid should get a hug. You know. That can be tricky. Sometimes parents do the, well, of course I still love you, but. And that sentence should be, of course I still love you, and stop at the but, because it's all going to go downhill from there.
Those of us in the room too, probably, I keep talking because once we leave the room, we talk to other people, right? And a lot of people find out that their kids are LGBTQ because other things are in crisis. Kids are trying to repress. A lot of them feel suicidal, but don't want to do anything drastic, and so they participate in a lot of self-harming behaviors. So by the time you find out your kid is LGBTQ, you find out because of Grindr, or you find out because of excessive drug use, or you find out because they've been running away a lot.
Internet history.
Yeah, so by the time you find out, it's the last straw, right? So they've got all of these addictive behaviors, they've got all of these really tragic behaviors, and so you find out internet history or Grindr, or the police bring them to the doorstep, and then you hear, I'm a lesbian, and your response is, and that! You know, on top of everything else we're dealing with, you've chosen this other horrendous thing to do, you know, kind of, you know, is often the thought process of really conservative parents. So, which is why we want to talk a lot about, like, regardless of what else is going on, that hug just comes right on in, right? Not you guys.
Right.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
Go for it.
And the challenging thing is that, you know, a lot of those issues are things that a parent will find and read the Family Acceptance Project booklet 6 months after their kid has come out to them. And then it is one of those unpleasant of reading it and, oh, these are all the and in our conversations with people more broadly, we can lay the foundation of talking more generally about whatever your child tells you, the right response as a parent is a hug and I love you.
Even if they're too a player.
Yes.
Right, because that was your post of.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so the third thing on the list is support your child's LGBT identity, even though you may feel uncomfortable. Discomfort can be a very real thing for parents with a transgender child. A lot of times, our transgender kids have been suppressing as long as they can. And by the time they finally tell their parents, it's a crisis and they need to transition, and they need to transition fast. And so for a parent, it can be like leaping onto this hurtling train. Because isn't it like that? Yes. And so there are times as a parent when you're still very uncomfortable. But you have to find a way, you know. And you don't have to do everything all at once, but to find a way to do a supporting thing right away, even when you're uncomfortable. When we figured out Grayson was trans, I went shopping to Walmart about 2 days later, and I bought him male underwear. Nobody saw that, him and me. But it was a parental down payment on I will find a way to be a supportive parent. And I think we can think about, you know, okay, what can I do to be supportive? I'm still really struggling. What can I do now to be supportive?
We find that a lot too with the LGB. When the kid finally gets an I love you, sometimes they do some experimenting, so our boys get a little more flamboyant than we've ever seen before, or girls get a little less feminine because they've been doing a lot of pretending for so long, and then they relax into themselves a little bit, and sometimes that can be a little bit shocking for parents, and so they'll say things like, I told him that I loved him, and now he's like all prancy and to disturb you. You feel like you don't recognize your kid while they're trying to find that balance themselves.
I love your example of buying the underwear, because that's a great example of little things that make so much difference.
And he wasn't quite ready to be publicly transitioned at that point. There were people that he and we needed to tell. Okay, so I need to go back. Okay, so advocate for your child when he or she is mistreated because of their LGBT identity. I think within the context of the church, it's particularly important to advocate to leadership, to young men's or young women's leaders, to talk to bishops. That's easier to do now that the new Mormon gay website is out, and I'm not a fan of every bit on the website, but the tips for parents is very useful for parents. It's also very useful for parents to take to leadership and say, I'm trying to follow this, look at this, this is straight from the church. This is what I'm trying to do to be supportive of my kid. And then say, you know, here's what's going on in young women's, and this is when my child is not feeling safe there. Can you make a change?
Is a lot of this stuff kind of being, like, maybe some subset of this, part of that website? I haven't actually.
I know that at least a couple of the people who worked on the new Mormon and Gay website are familiar with the work of the County Settings Project. So that's the first thing.
A question for you and Jen. As you've been doing this outreach and everything, what have you found, like what makes a parent, phrase this right, I kind of see it as like there's a tipping point, right? And parents find out their kids are gay and they're either gonna like be pro-church, pro-organization, kind of choose the organization over the kid. And then there's parents that are like, no matter what, I'm with my kid. Is there something in that, is that just personality, or have you found that there's any, does my question make sense? It makes sense out there.
I don't know. Have different answers on that.
There are people that change over time significantly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at the possibility that your relationship to the church may change is very frightening to a lot of people. In a way, it was really easy for me, honestly, as an atheist. I took a step outside of this is the one true way to be a Mormon quite a while ago. In fact, quite a while before I met my husband. And found, but for a lot of people for whom their path to happiness is I take every step on the straight and narrow, that can be very scary. So,
I raised my hand for 5 minutes, so I'm just not going to interject like all you other competent people.
I can't see your hand, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I do want to say as a parent, it's not, even though this is so much bigger, but it's not just that you're LGBT. When your child is 16 and you found out that he was smoking, we grieve, we hurt, we feel less than. We didn't protect you from what that could do to you if you can't stop. For some academia parents, if you get a B or a C, they grieve because now you're not going to become what they wanted for you. You all that had been Mormon before, did you not grieve that you wouldn't go to the temple? If that's how you felt like you always would, did you not grieve the loss of sitting at church with your family or, whatever traditions your family had? And I think parents, gosh dang, we grieve and hurt every time you do. And then we have our own grief too. So we're double hit. And I was reading all these things, and it's the same, when one of your lovely kids comes and says, Mom, I just need to let you know I had sex. And he's 15 and you're saying, but you have to be comfortable. Here's this thing. I'm going to talk to my 15-year-old boy about safe sex. The best is not to have any. That ship has sailed now. That one that we had planned all these years of raising kids is no longer there. Now we have to move. We're moving. We're learning and growing just as you guys are. And we're like they say a fine wine is. With age, we mellow. I want to just die if one of my kids told me they had sex when he was 15. But now, if you were telling me this at 30, my reaction would be different. So we grow too, and we learn too. So, anyway, that's all I wanted to say. It's not just LGBT. Smokers, people having sex, people getting loose. You know, it's anything off of what we have fantasized.
Yeah. And that really is an excellent point. The Family Acceptance Project is very focused on helping parents be better parents of LGBT kids. But the reality is, this will help parents be better parents. And, you know, every parent wants that, to try to, you know, do the best they can for their kid. And there's a lot of different things that listening to our kids and affirming who they are will help them strengthen them. So, do we have time or we?
Do you want to say?
I don't know, I was just going to answer that question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, in watching women a lot, what I see is the major tipping point is privilege within patriarchy. A lot of them can't make a lot of movement without a husband who's on board, because their marriage hinges on that. And some of them have enough distance from that they're moving regardless. Like if I had to choose, I wouldn't be divorced before I would sacrifice one of my kids, because I'm feminist enough that wouldn't be an option. But you'll hear a lot of women who can't. They'll say, well, I'd like to come, but my husband says I can't, or or I would like to participate, or I'll ask my husband. Or you can see a lot of undercurrents of patriarchy in those things, where they're asking permission, and so the husband's kind of in charge, and you can see within the organizational structure itself that maternal instinct is a little different. If you look at the difference between like the dragon dads and the mama dragons, there's a difference between the way men and women respond overall. And then within the women, this is all theoretical, of course, but that's my perspective, what I see, that the women are driven differently than the men are driven, and the women who hold back and end up choosing organization primarily tend to be doing it behind husbands who aren't ready yet.
The other thing that I see in the I'll Walk With You group that is for parents who are active in the church who have LGBT kids is that they are choosing both. And some of those parents encounter situations where their local church is being very hurtful to their kid. And what I see often over time is that those parents leave. They come into that group so committed to be both, to be an active Mormon and to be an affirming parent. But if they hit that grindstone where here are people being rude and rejecting to my child, you know, and so I feel like as a Mormon, I want to help change church culture so that we make the church not only a safe place for LGBT kids to be, but a safe place for their parents. Because it's not just the kids that get driven out. Sometimes it's the parents that get driven out too.
I'm talking long haul. Like once long haul. At the beginning, there's like this transition period where people are like, I'm gonna be the change for good, I'm gonna stick it out. That's it. I'm talking like 3 years.
Do they feel like they're succeeding? People that are staying in and trying to defend?
Some people are succeeding. Yeah. Deborah Coe's one. She's doing some huge stuff. Yeah. But it does finish something.
Yeah. We're in a marathon, not a sprint. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.